chapter of Royal Society of Biology 2021. Today's talk covers an interesting interdisciplinary topic that many of you must have wondered about, consciousness. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker for today, Professor Nao Tsuchiya. He joined the School of Psychological Sciences, Monash University, Australia in January 2012, and currently is a professor and the principal investigator of TLab. Apart from teaching and conducting research at Monash, he's also a visiting researcher at CINET, Osaka University, Japan, and at the Department of Dynamic Brain Imaging, Advanced Telecommunication Research, Japan. His main research interest is to uncover neuronal bases of consciousness. Through interdisciplinary collaborations with researchers from different fields, he uses a variety of research approaches, ranging from empirical methods, including lab-based or online-based psychological experiments and neuroimaging, computational methods like information theory, causal analysis, modeling of neuronal activity, and to theoretical methods, including conceptual analysis and category theory methods. Today, he'll be discussing the science of consciousness and how our brain supports our conscious experiences. So over to you, Professor Tsuchiya. Yeah.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
All right. Thank you, Niromiti, for your kind introduction and also invitation to this Cogito 137 and also Royal Society Biology Week. My name is Nao Tsuchiya, and I'm going to talk about the topic of consciousness, and the title of the talk is How Our Brain Makes Conscious Experiences. So I want you to focus on this square, blue square right now, and then start thinking about a little bit about what this means. And my question I want you to think is that is the blue I see or you see the same as the blue you see or I see? And can it be possibly different? Like whether I see this as blue, but it could be yellow for you. Is that actually possible or not? And if it's not that level of the huge difference, maybe it's possible that my blue is more closer to green than your blue is closer to your green. Something like that. Have you ever wondered this kind of question about what you're seeing? So this is one of the questions on consciousness. And the consciousness research aims to reveal the relationship between matter and mind. And the matter here means the biological mechanisms, in particular brain, and mind is our conscious experience. So the outline of the talk is as follows. First, I'm going to talk about the background on consciousness research in general, and then to go to our current research, and then finally future prospects or conclusions. So the first background. The consciousness as a target of scientific study is have a very long history, but now it's regarded as the quite empirical scientific study object. It started with the Descartes, as here shown here, and it's an old problem of mind and matter, and the various promising theories are available. And solving the mystery of consciousness has broad and deep impacts from basic to applied science. And then some theories are even making precise predictions on consciousness and brain. The first thing is that what's the problem of consciousness? Just to give you a background, the brief history of consciousness research involves initially a long history of scientific philosophical discussions, but then Descartes made this quite important remark in the Principles of Philosophy, saying cogito ergo sum, which is part of the title of this entity, cogito, and it means I think therefore I am. And what is important is that Descartes pointed out that brain or objective stuffs or matters and the consciousness or subjective stuffs or mind is completely separate things and do not interact. And that's the dawn of the dualistic kind of idea of consciousness and the brain. And then following Descartes, Galileo also pushed this type of idea and then proposed that science should focus on the objective world. And the subjective stuffs should be outside of the science. And further on, this kind of attitude was more solidified by the Newton. And he basically said that the target of the science is really nature, and nature is written in the world of the mathematics. So if consciousness cannot be ever, mathematically described, then there is no point or possibility to think about consciousness as a study of the science. But then afterwards, around the turn of the centuries, 19th, 20th centuries, there were several fathers of the experimental psychology. Wundt, Fechner, and James all kind of considered about the birth of the mathematics of consciousness. And that's called psychophysics in the literature. It is sort of the discipline that tries to link between the psycho or psyche, mind or mental, with the physics. That's a measurement outside of the world. So here, what they tried to do was to treating the brain itself as a black box, but trying to extract the laws that bridges between the physics and the psyche. And then they discovered various interesting kind of phenomenon, also laws, but still treating the brain as a black box. And pushing this direction further, it resulted in so-called behaviorism. And there, the behavioristic scientists thought that consciousness should be still outside of psychology, and treating consciousness as, in a sense, a prohibited kind of topic for research. But since 1990s, because of the brain imaging technique has so much developed, that various scientists started to identify the neural correlates of consciousness, and that's one of the births of the modern study of consciousness. And here is an overview of the more than 10 approaches to the study of consciousness, and even probably more right now. That's sort of the interaction between the philosophy and the neuroscience. And there are many of the familiar faces for some of you. And I'm not going to talk about each of these, topics or theories, but when I was a PhD student, I worked with Christoph Koch, who proposed this neural correlates of consciousness, and then developed some techniques. And also, one of my central kind of research topic is the relationship between consciousness and attention. And then that led to no-report paradigm. And also recently, I've been pushing this category theoretic approach to consciousness that is sort of interdisciplinary mathematical and also psychophysics approach to consciousness, which I'm going to talk about today. So rather than giving you further detail, I just give you a couple of more impacts. So this is a book of book written by Martin Pistmoras, and he was one of the person who suffered from the brain damage, or sort of the disease that made him incommunicable with other people. And he was treated at some point that he's not really living a life or conscious, and but he eventually recovered and then even wrote the book Ghost Boy here. And it's a quite striking kind of book describing what it's like to be a locked-in syndrome from within the person, and who is treated as almost dead. And this type of the problem of misdiagnosis of the level of consciousness is a quite a severe problem in the society. And so application in the clinics, engineering, and society to improve the quality of life is one of the major impacts of the consciousness studies. And one of the studies along this line was published in 2006. Here is the brain imaging experiment where they asked the patient who was supposed to be vegetative state to imagine playing tennis or walking around. And then they found that the distinct pattern of the brain activation was found in this patient. And this is very similar pattern compared to the control subjects. So based on this, they found that, oh, this particular person was supposed to be vegetative and non-conscious, but it's unlikely that is the case. And something along this line will be also discovered or developed into the future. Here's one example where we don't really know what's going to happen, what's going on. This is a premature baby, whether they are experiencing anything, including pain or other sensation. We really don't know. But this kind of stuff is something that consciousness research into the future can make impacts into the society. So consciousness research is also accelerated over the several years. And in particular, I'm going to talk a little bit about this adversarial collaboration scheme supported by Templeton Wild Charity Foundation. And in this scheme, two of the theories here depicted as the GNWT, Global Neural Network Space Theory, and IIT, Integrated Information Theory, was pitted against each other. And then for a particular experimental situation, they are forced to make some kind of prediction. And then, as I briefly reviewed, that there are lots of theories in consciousness right now, but by making a distinct prediction about what's going to happen in consciousness and the brain between these theories, hopefully only those theories that are correct in a prediction will survive, and then that will prompt even faster growth of the maturity of science of consciousness. And along this effort, sharing the data openly and the pre-registration of the theoretical predictions are going to be standard in the science of consciousness. So in summary, consciousness research now is, they are trying to understand how the world works. We need to understand the relationship between consciousness and the brain. It was left out starting from the time of the Descartes, but now it's coming back into the science. The scientific research on consciousness is now established, and the latest major upgrades include the comparison across the theories with the registration. So now our current research focus. So we are trying to establish a gold standard towards a solution of the problem of qualia. What it means is that all theories that I reviewed quickly have not faced up with the difficulty of quantifying qualia. And the qualia I'm going to use to mean the same thing as the contents of consciousness. The things that you see or hear or feel or think about. And for that goal, what we are proposing is a novel paradigm called qualia structure. And here we want to quantify qualia based on the category theory. And that's what I'm going to explain. And currently trying to establish it as a sort of paradigm, and then mathematically and psychophysically testing its ideas, but then starting with a visual qualia. But it should be applicable to many other qualia. So to explain this project, I need to first define or explain what is the problem of qualia. So consciousness can mean both level of consciousness. The locked-in syndrome is, for example, one of the conditions that seems to have a lower level of consciousness, and also even going farther below, such as vegetative conscious states or vegetative states or coma, we lose consciousness. Or deep anesthesia or deep sleep, we also lose consciousness. That's a level of consciousness. The other type of consciousness that we talk about is qualia. It's contents of consciousness when you have a high level of consciousness, and it's about meaning of what we are experiencing, or qualia, quality of experience. And this term, qualia, has been the source of all our knowledge. right? That means that all we can actually know about the world is primarily first what you experience. Through the textbook or through the YouTube, you will learn or acquire new knowledge, and then maybe you can make some kind of theoretical prediction and so on. But these are all based on, first of all, qualia that you experience. But it's kind of weird, and the fact that they are the source of the knowledge, but it is also most difficult to define. And famous philosopher such as Daniel Dennett said that once qualia is basically impossible to study, and that's because qualia are ineffable, meaning that it cannot be subject to description by the words, and also it's enigmatic, unclear in terms of its biological functions, and it's private. My qualia is private to me, and that's the reason why I asked about the question of this blueness in the beginning. My blueness is only accessible to me, so that's private. Private things cannot be investigated scientifically. Also, it is intrinsic. It cannot be quantified from outside. So these four properties make it difficult or impossible to study qualia. And in fact, most of the traditional neuroscience has avoided problem of consciousness altogether. Even not only qualia, but a problem of consciousness altogether. What conventional neuroscience tries to do is to establish this kind of function f that leads that sort of tries to establish the relationship between sensory inputs or motor outputs and what's happening inside a brain activity or response. So once they can establish this kind of equation, given stimulus input and what's the response in the brain, then they are basically happy. That's a sort of the basic kind of framework of the neuroscience. And on the other hand, since 1990s, neural correlative consciousness has been trying to do is one step further, and that's the one that has been proposed by the Francis Crick and the Christoph Koch. And there, what they proposed was to use some specific stimuli, such as NECA cube here. And if you look at this stimulus, then what you notice is that your conscious experience flips between the lower face here to be in front, or top right surface here front, right? And then here, this kind of conventional neuroscience framework doesn't work, because stimulus input itself is the same, but response, brain activity itself is also changing. But what we want to quantify is something about what we are experiencing here. So the stimulus is fixed here, but consciousness itself flips. And then here, what we can try to do is to do the mathematical theory of consciousness, which try to relate brain activity itself, response, to predict what the consciousness is going to be, C. And then the finding G, as opposed to F, is sort of the difference in terms of the framework between the traditional neuroscience and the theory study of consciousness in terms of neural basis. However, and this type of approach has flourished over the last 30 years. But there is one of the, there are lots of problems with this as well. One of the problems that I see from the point of view of the qualia is that this kind of approach requires us to binarize qualia. So here, for example, the NECA cube has to be generating a couple of few different types of the reports, right? Such as left front or right front. And then other types of the study using the backward masking or other types of visual display. Maybe we can present the same stimulus over and over, and then subject may report that, oh, I saw it, or I didn't see it, in one trial, but not the other. Here, again, we can fix the stimulus and then change the subjective experience. But with this method, the most important aspect of qualia is lost. What it means is that the qualia are the ways we see and feel, or we experience, and that they are the meaning of our experience. But it's the binary of our experience completely, misses the point of this qualia quite a bit. So, is this the end of the world? That's not the case. And in fact, some of the famous philosophers like Chalmers or neuroscientist Giulio Tononi has been proposing that rather than fixing on one binary, thing, yes or no, or left or right, we need to look at the structure. And in terms of the Chalmers idea, it's called psychophysical coherence, which is kind of vague, but he wants to have some kind of structural comparison. And also Tononi has this maximally irreducible conceptual structures. And in my work, in collaboration with Hayato Saigo, we have been working to formalize this structure using the category theory. And the category theory is a mathematical tool that has been developed to deal with structure. And what structure means is roughly like a shape. Shape is something that is usually not possible to consider in numbers, right? But the category theory is the one that can deal with many things in a flexible way. And in particular, we are focusing on this particular theory or theorem called the Yoneda lemma. And then to use that to quantify qualia through a massive web of relationships. So quantifying qualia structures through a massive relationships among qualia, that's the idea. But the question is, can we characterize something that is difficult to define through relationships? So what Dennett or other philosophers has pointed out is that the redness of the red, for example, here, is impossible to define. And in fact, I can't really define the way I see this red. But what I can do, for example, is that, oh, this red is very similar to the red I see in the sunset, or the red I see in the red wine, or something like that. And our idea is to not to limit the relationship or similarity in one case, but to use it much more. And in fact, this type of the strategy has been taken in many different fields outside of consciousness. For example, when you are trying to define the word in terms of its meaning, sometimes it's very difficult to define the meaning of the word. But surrounding or similar or many related words in the way they are related, then the meaning of the word becomes very clear. And in fact, this is the way that the thesaurus actually works to define the words, right? And then also in the ecology, defining or characterizing one particular animal or plant is almost impossible to without talking about relationship with other animals. So to define one animal, you need another animal or plant. And so it seems tautological, but that's the essence of the ecological system, right? And then black holes, that's also another interesting case. Black hole cannot be observed directly because it absorbs everything, but its interaction with the neighborhood is something that we can capture and also quantify. And then through these interaction with the surroundings, we can quantify or predict what the black hole is, and so on. That's what the cosmology is doing. Similar thing happens also in the mathematics. Mathematics, if you deal with the infinity, you just can't deal with that, but its relation with another infinity or other objects allows you to characterize what the infinity means in the mathematics, and also even categorize different kind of infinities. And the most possibly intuitive kind of example is a personality. Like when I try to define myself, I could list my properties, but it's much easier potentially to explain my relationship with others, friends, and or students, or postdocs, or my family, and so on. So this kind of intuition is actually proven true in the mathematical framework of the category theory, specifically Yoneda lemma. And the lemma is like a pre-theorem for a major theorem and so on. And if you know mathematics, then what Yoneda lemma is this enigmatic kind of equation. But what it essentially says is that radiations of one things are the same with the other rest of the things. Then those two things, A and B, are the same. So the bottom left part, HA and HB, means that the relationship between A and everything else, and relationship between B and everything else. And if these relations are exactly the same, then A and B must be the same. So in the case of the color, what it means is that to characterize what the red is like, I can rate the similarity between red and purple, or red and orange, and red and another red. And then if my similarity of the red is similar to another red, then we can be sure that they are the same. That's the idea. And this is an intuitive example of the Yoneda lemma that we talked in the paper that is going to be out a couple of days. And here, for example, the luminance of the A and B, the color of the grayness is completely different. But when you the Yoneda lemma suggests that this surrounding interaction or a similarity rating with other parts are the same, then it should look similar. And then, in fact, if you remove all the surrounding, and then all these surrounding between A and others are the same as B's surrounding, then eventually A and B look the same. So that's one of the implication or application of the Yoneda lemma in the way we can see the world. So how can we use the Yoneda lemma in research to address the new questions? And as one of the questions that we focused recently is the following: are the color qualia at the periphery illusory or not? So this is a figure that many of the textbook in psychology or neuroscience show. And you might have seen it in some of the books, or you might have learned in the lecture. This is how the receptors in the eye distributes across the eyes, okay, or retina, back of the eyes. You have a seat of the neuron structure, and that's called the retina. And then what it means is that there are two types of the receptors. And then type of the receptor that matters for the color perception is this type called cones. And that's depicted by this green line here. And then as you notice, the green line peaks at 0. What it means is that at the exact location that you are looking at, either on the display or outside or wherever, exact location that you are looking at, the density of this cone are really high. And that means that cone that are responsible for color perception is very rich at the point of the fixation, point of the where you are looking at. But it's also striking to notice that within a couple of degrees from the center of where you are looking at, its density decreases really dramatically and then becomes almost flat here. And then based on this, many psychologists or philosophers thought that, oh, this means that our color perception in the periphery is like an illusion, right? It's like sometimes a metaphor of the light in the refrigerator was used in this, to deliver this kind of, idea. You feel like, you are living in a colorful world, but it's almost always, it's because of the memory or expectation or inattention. If you look at, okay, so here there is some kind of, light in my room, and it looks yellow. And even if I look here, I still feel like there is a yellow thing here. But that's because I remember this, or I maybe unconsciously, or I expect there to be some kind of yellowness and so on. And this is very similar to the person who thinks that inside a refrigerator it's always light, but in fact when you open the refrigerator, there is some kind of thermostat or some kind of mechanism here, and then that triggers the light inside the refrigerator. So even though when you open the refrigerator, it's always light, when you close it, it's actually black, dark. Similarly, these type of philosophers or neuroscientists or psychologists thinks that because of this density drop, your experience of the color is just false or illusory. It's only there when you look at directly, and it's always filled in by the expectation or memory. So this goes against with different kind of the people's ideas. So Tononi or Chalmers or Victor Lame, they are on the same camp where if you feel qualia in the color, then that's the first starting point. Phenomenology or consciousness is the first thing. It's not correct to start with the retina or whatever neuroscience. And so if you have a strong belief or strong experience itself that you are experiencing the color, there must be some explanation, right? And in fact, this 5 degree of the visual angle that this thing here already implies is this level of the distance. If you can adjust the distance from your display to yourself right now, in my case, it's like this distance. If you adjust your thumb to this image on the bottom left, then that's the width of the thumb at arm's length is known to be roughly 1 degree visual angle. And that means that the 5 degree is around here. And for me, it's really clear that I can see this yellow, a purple thing over there. So it's hard to know how to accept that this is an illusion, right? And I can also see the yellow and then red very clearly. So what's going on here? So we decided to start a major color query structure to address this issue of whether the peripheral color query are real or illusory. And this is taken by our postdoc, Ariel Zeleznikov Johnston. And what he thought was that, okay, so we know that the color has this ring-like structure. Even though you may know, you may have learned in the school that the color is basically induced by some kind of wavelength distribution. In the case of the laser, the very short wavelength light is invisible to us, and then that starts from blue or purple, and then as the wavelength of the laser increases, then eventually it arrives at the red. So, and then it becomes invisible again. So it's called infrared. So starting from ultraviolet and then visible light and then infrared. That's a one-dimensional kind of structure. But in our own experience, the color looks like related in a way that is like a circle. It's not trivial why this has to be the case, right? Like there are lots of other types of the structure of the qualia, such as music or tone. Sound of the D is similar to C, similar to D, B, and so on, but different from F. But the sound of the D, 1 octave above or below, looks similar. So in that case, sound is supposed to have this kind of spiral-like shape. So it's not the case that all the qualia has this round ring-like shape, but the color probably has, at least at the level of the isoluminance. So what Ariel wanted to ask was that, okay, so if that's the case, then is the color qualia circle the same at the center of the field and the periphery? And if that's the case, with controlling some situation to reduce the effects of the memory or expectation, we can address this question. So this is a experimental paradigm that he developed. So we would flash 2 color patch very briefly, and also randomly. That's important. You cannot make an eye movement to the location of the patch, and also you cannot expect what the location there will be. And also, because it's random, you also cannot judge your decision based on the memory. And then after each patch pair, we ask people to rate the similarity. So that's green and blue. So I would say maybe it's not that similar. 4 out of 7. That was green and green, so I would say 0. It's almost the same. And that's green and blue again, and it's not that different. So maybe 3 for me. And then pink and red for me. So it was maybe 1, highly similar, and so on. And we did that quite extensively, and then we got the results. So here's the results. If you focus on, so here, this part is 9-color patch that was presented around the fovea or a similar location as where you are looking at. And then when it's paired with this another color in the center, then the similar colors are rated as very similar, meaning this a very whitish kind of rating. And then if you look at some of the pairs that are very different, like red and green, then that's rated as very dissimilar, so it's rated as black. So there is this kind of structure, and then this is very similar to the ring-like structure if you analyze the data in one particular way, which I skip. But when we presented the 2 stimulus that is unexpected and also not possible to memorize, both periphery pair also has very similar kind of structure, like central structure. And even more, when we paired central to the peripheral, again, it's almost the same kind of structure like this way. So that means that the structure of the color experience at the center and the periphery is the same. Okay. So this is inconsistent with the view that the color qualia in the periphery are illusory. And one way to reconcile this is to explain that this as an increase in the receptive field size at the periphery and across hierarchies. But we are planning to also, extend this experiment with a much farther periphery using this type of new stimulus display. Anyway, so one way to explain this, and also important thing to note is that the y-axis always has been the density, right? So the scientists always have to pay attention to the unit of the graph, and this is, in this case, it was density. So, and density doesn't go to 0, and then it always remains more or less the same. That means that if you can multiply this density by many larger areas, then you can get actually quite a big size or number of the receptors in the periphery. And in fact, that is likely to be happening in the case of the human eyes. For the retina or our eyes, center of the field has a very small neuron. On the other hand, a peripheral visual field has a much bigger type of density, the dendrites, and that can collect wider areas of the light input, and that's also converging and then creating bigger sort of a field of view for many different neurons in the later area of the brain. So that means that when the stimulus is enlarged as you go to the periphery, it becomes easier to collect information about the color across the areas, and that gives you the larger amount of the color information. However, if the input is sparse or very small and uniform, then it's still visible in the center but not in the periphery. You can probably imagine what's going to happen when the small things are presented in the periphery. And so previous study, which used a very small stimulus at the center and the periphery, have concluded that, oh, we lose the color sensation in the periphery. But that's really, in a sense, not really optimal. When inputs to the periphery are optimally colored, we experience them as colored. And in fact, measuring color experience with a tiny stimulus is almost similar to measuring your language ability with the people who do not, understand, and assuming that you don't understand Japanese, and then we conclude that, oh, you have a very bad language ability. It's just ridiculous. You need to use the thing that the system or thing is good at until to prove the ability of the system, right? So our next step along this kind of quality structure paradigm is to first, we establish this quality structure through the relationships, not only one relation, but many different kind of relations, and also try to find or establish this mathematical footing of this experiment, and then also extract information from the brain. And that's what we are planning to do right now or doing right now. And then eventually trying to find the relationship between this structure of experience and the structure of the brain activation and the structure itself. And I'm now, my book on this kind of project is written in Japanese and will be published. And I'm also trying to translate it in English right now. So please wait for it. And in terms of the brain activation, what we are doing is using both types, two different kind of the measurement technique. One is called fMRI that people have used to detect this consciousness in the vegetative patient, and also EEG, that is brain wave non-invasively from outside of the brain. And here we did basically similar kind of the color similarity task inside of fMRI or with the EEG cap. And then we looked at the pattern of the spatial pattern of the activity in the brain using fMRI, or temporal development of the pattern of the response using EEG. And then using this, we can extract the structure of the brain response in EEG or fMRI, and then see whether that actually looks similar to our experiential structure. And here's, for example, example of the EEG similarity response. Okay, and then starting point is so this type of the experiment is going to be quite difficult, but what we also know is that the relationship between the brain response per se versus relationship of the conscious reports are not that highly correlated. And that's one of the reasons is that we still don't know what type of algorithm or mechanism is involved in making some parts of the brain related to particular type of the consciousness, and another type of the brain parts to be related to non-conscious computation. So if we use just a raw data or raw response like this, then it just doesn't look like similar to what we experience. So there are lots of theories or algorithm has been proposed, but one of the most promising theory is called integrated information theory, to get from the raw brain structure plus brain activity to extract something that is relevant for consciousness, but and filter out many of the things that are irrelevant for the consciousness, non-conscious activity. But it has been very difficult to compute. And so, we are working to make this IIT, integrated information, computable using some kind of mathematical technique. And also, we recently developed some kind of computing mechanism to exactly compute that. And by doing so, what we are hoping for is that to extract information structure from fMRI or EEG, and then compute this red structure and then green structure, and then extract some kind of similarity matrix based on this information structure that is only relevant for conscious experience. And then we compare this behavioral data or something that we report, and then extract that structure from that, and then try to relate these neuronal or information-based structure and experience-based structure. And then if we can bridge the gap between this, that's going to be a success of our qualia structure paradigm. And that's beyond, in a sense, the neural correlates of consciousness kind of program that has been proposed or done before, which is just trying to focus on one particular type of stimulus and then report of A or B, and then report a correlation between A or B type neural activity. We are trying to expand it a bit more at the level of the structure. So just briefly, I'm going to mention about the future prospects or conclusion of our consciousness study. So for example, understanding the query structure will be good for understanding subjective experience of others, including humans or other animals. So I don't know if you have ever tasted, this is a sea urchin or abalone, but for me, before I knew about this, I always thought these kind of animals or sea animals as just food. But once I noticed or once I learned how they move and how they behave in the sea, then suddenly it starts to feel like, oh, this is not really like a food, but it's an things that has a nervous system and could be probably like sleeping or waking and so on. But it's probably not seeing or feeling emotion or planning and so on. But understanding what the animal or other can experience or do in the environment is the starting point to understand what they could be doing. And so the understanding is the first step for the animal rights ecological conservation of many things. And this is a video that showed that rats can actually help other people, other rats to escape them, and that sort of starts to let us think about, oh, maybe rats are thinking or feeling something similar with us. But without knowing this type of experiment, we never know that rats could have potentially conscious experience. And this is a world map of animal rights kind of distribution. But here, understanding qualia of other species could help promoting this animal rights and welfare. And another possibility is to understand the meaning aspects of the information. So qualia is essentially the thing that can be meaningful only to you. This is going to be important when people start to create AI or robots that feel like humans. And this is a quote from Richard Feynman, but he says, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." And similar for robots or iPhone. If iPhone says with this painful or really sad, we can't still believe it because it's most likely just faking. They are not really experiencing pain. But as we understand more about the meaning or qualia of structure, and then maybe we can implement that in the robot or AI in the future. So in summary, we can now quantify consciousness or qualia through relations, and then we can hope as a next step extract information structure from brain, and then category theoretical approaches can work to analyze our structures. And then as a hope for the future, understanding others and other species will improve the quality of life and society and the meaning of information for better AI or robotics. And fundamental problems of consciousness or qualia require interdisciplinary approaches, as I kind of outlined. So addressing the problem of consciousness brings various impacts to the world. So that's it, and this is the collaborator for me. So this is qualia structure collaborators, and this is my lab's members and so on, and founders. Thank you, and that's it for me.
Thank you, Nao.
Yep.
Thank you. It was a really nice talk. You covered a lot of areas from the history of consciousness to what you're doing exactly and how many theories are progressing. I had this one, as you mentioned in your last few slides. Unfortunately, we don't have Q&A with audience, but do you mind if I ask you questions?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So in last few slides, you mentioned that about animals and consciousness. So do you believe? First of all, I have one question. Do you believe in that animals have consciousness? And second is that there was this one paper by Alex Jordan, when he's like, oh, fish are, they have some kind of consciousness because they can recognize themselves in, um, when they were subjected to a mirror test. Like,
Mhm.
to know yourself, do you think that's an enough condition of saying that they are conscious, to
So first of
self-identify
all,
themselves?
okay. So first of all, we need to think about what we mean by consciousness here, right?
Hmm.
And if you are talking about self-consciousness, that as you kind of
Hmm.
implied by
Hmm.
the study of fish and its mirror test,
Hmm.
which I don't know whether
Hmm.
that exists, I don't know, but that's more about conscious experience or conscious recognition of itself through the mirror. That's one type of the qualia. I think
Hmm.
it's one aspect of consciousness. That's fine,
Hmm.
but
Hmm.
if you loosen up the definition of the consciousness or what we are talking about as the sleep-wake cycle,
Hmm. Hmm.
when you are wakeful, you experience something, right? And when
Hmm.
you are under the anesthesia, you don't.
Yeah.
That kind of distinction of wakeful versus unwakeful, I think that's probably shared by many other animals. So one thing to think about is that the definition of consciousness. That's one thing. Then the
Hmm.
second thing is that the continuity of the animal kingdom. If I
Yeah.
believe that I'm conscious and you are conscious, then you are not soliptic. I believe that there are some kind of things that are common between us at the level of the
Hmm.
structure, most likely, and that makes us similarly conscious, right? But then that kind of idea is very easy to extend to monkeys,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Monkeys have very similar visual system as us, and the genetics is also very similar, and behavior is also very similar. Color, structure, everything really, really similar. But we don't have the same kind of structure, similarity in terms of behavior, in terms of self-recognition or future planning or many different kind of cognitive stuff like calculation. But that's the same for human babies as well, right? Or kids.
Yeah.
So if you talk about other animals, what aspect of consciousness we are talking about is one thing, and also continuity of the animals. There is probably very difficult to make any kind of boundary between one particular
Hmm.
animal to the next that has consciousness and no consciousness,
Exactly.
especially for the wakefulness, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So same can be argued about babies as well, because
Yes,
right, like how we, yeah, yeah.
I think so.
Also now that, in light of recent Nobel prizes for 2021, like in physics Nobel Prize, it was rewarded to a interdisciplinary field. Do you think that consciousness, if we can establish, like empirically test out and define and know consciousness, do you think that it can be, will it be worthy of a Nobel Prize? Will it
Yeah,
get a
I think
Nobel
it's
Prize?
easily a couple of Nobel Prize at least. I mean,
Are
of
you
course,
planning
because
on?
as I said, that since the start of the science, pretty much, it's left outside of science. So it's one of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
first, huge division, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
if we can understand this, enigmatic things, then of course, it endorses, almost Nobel Prize, of course, and it
So
has
you one of
many
the
sub questions within it as well.
hmm, yeah, yeah. So if
Yeah.
if if consciousness gets a Nobel, you'll be one of the first baseline researchers who worked on it,
That
right?
I don't know, and I also don't, think that's going to be the case, or I don't care as well. I'll try to contribute to that, but
Mhm.
for example, currently available theories, I said that there are 10 theories, but none of them has been, in a sense, subjected to the real
Hmm.
tests, right? So
Yeah,
it's really far away from getting there in that sense.
but yeah.
But I also try to live very long. Recently, I decided to live until 140, so I will try to see
Wow.
how it goes.
Yeah. I want to live long enough to get like so that you can get a to see you get a Nobel Prize. That's for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah. It one more question. So I have
yeah.
been associated with a group who like college kids from my college who are very interested in reality and
Mm,
consciousness. And there was
mm,
this long debate on how because my qualia is my own and it's
mm-hmm,
my self. So it's my own. I can't share it with you, no matter how much how like as you suggested, we can somewhat quantify qualia by taking similarity ratings between
mm-hmm,
structures or
mm,
different structures.
mm,
But then
mm,
how do you say that so there's this question that my reality is different from yours. How do
mm-hmm.
you test that? Like how do you feel that we can empirically solve that question? Because that is going to be that is how it is, right? So how do you
Yeah, so
want how do you
yeah, so one of the reason why people give up really quickly
hmm,
is this
hmm,
type of idea that especially this ineffability. The
yeah
way you experience any kind of moment or the way you experience the word apple is so difficult to define. And we just can't have the same thing, as others, also, as a private. But I think it's really also bad kind of, of habit of the philosophers to start with something extremely difficult. What I mean is that
hmm,
if you, have been exposed to this type of the debate, such as inverted vision or inverted qualia, people talk
Richard
about,
Brown.
yeah, like, if my, blue is swapped with your yellow
Hmm,
and things like that.
hmm,
And then because we grow up with this type of
hmm.
the knowledge or understanding, it's impossible to just, notice any difference, right? Even if there isn't a
Yeah, yeah,
swap.
yeah.
However, this is almost always built on the argument based on the color. And the color is particularly difficult to think about it. And but it's also easy to imagine that it's possible to swap. But if you start thinking about this with a location, for example, can
Hmm.
you swap this particular central location with this one?
No.
Probably
Yeah, yeah.
no. And it's
Yeah.
no because the way our brain is configured is in the way that that makes this kind of spatial
Hmm.
relationship in this way. So once you swap this, then this relation to others has to be
Hmm.
also warped into here.
Swapped. Yeah.
Yeah. And color is also like this. That's but my guess. It's not like, color is 3D cones and, shape and, ring, as I kind of, depicted here.
Hmm.
It's much more complicated than this in reality.
Hmm.
For
Yeah, yeah,
example,
yeah.
this kind of color wheel never able to, describe the color of the gold, for example, or
Yeah.
skin color. And that's because color is not like three-dimensional, two-dimensional kind of thing. It's much more related to the texture, and the texture has to be related to the shape and so on. So just changing color only
Hmm.
without affecting anything is, I think, impossible. But these are the things that we can start to develop by examining empirically the structure of the experience. And nobody has
Yeah.
tried to do it, in a massive way. And that's if it fails, maybe, the people who say that, we cannot study consciousness is correct, but I don't see that's the, current,
Hmm.
common sense or understanding.
Yeah. One last question from
Okay.
on this exactly. You said that color is difficult to describe or quantify. So why haven't we progressed into something which is easily understandable, which can be similar to us, even like for example maybe lines or some structure or shapes, which can be or textures or some different different medium than colors, which can make us understand this better, and then we go to something which we can't describe properly.
If you are asking that why the other people have not studied or philosophers haven't thought about anything other than color, then what I wanted to say was that those people who talk about color as a sort of example of impossibility of the study of consciousness, they tend to use the most difficult thing, right? Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
slightly different from what I said as a sort of the difference from the previous dominant kind of approach. So there are lots of people out there right now who are making lots of progress using this neural correlative consciousness kind of framework. And there are lots
Yeah.
of models as well. But what I'm pointing out here is that this kind of experiment is not enough to start to tackle with the problem of aquaria because they don't deal with the structure.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It does not even capture the richness of qualia, which we are trying to empirically find out, right?
Yeah, in a sense, yes.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, I think this is it. Thank
Yeah.
you for
Okay.
this wonderful talk, and thank you for taking
Yeah.
your time out for
Yeah.
giving us this
Thank you.
wonderful talk.
Thank you for the invitation and for the question. See you.
Yes.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. See ya. Thank you Kojito team for organizing this talk, and Aniket for streaming and taking care of the recordings and stuff. So thank you.